I think we'll move on to Apollo's arrow.
Okay.
I know when I spoke to Nobel laureate Peter Doherty, what we mostly talked about was COVID emerging through zoonotic transfer. So essentially in bats, probably to pangolins, or some sort of intermediary host. Now the theory, which seems to be taken much more seriously, even Dr. Fauci has talked about it, which is the lab leak hypothesis. And I wondered what you thought of that.
In Apollo's arrow, I said that most likely it was a zoonotic leap, but we could not exclude the lab leak hypothesis. The consensus among expert geneticists is that this is not an engineered pathogen, nor was it a modified pathogen, although the latter is a little harder to be certain of, but it seems very unlikely. So the competing hypotheses are, did it come from an animal or was it an accidental lab leak? Nobody thinks it was a deliberate lab leak either, by the way. That seems very unlikely. So, for example, a naturally collected pathogen that had been brought to the lab for study and then, oops, it escaped in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. If I had to bet, I still think the zoonotic leap is more likely. Why? Well, because SARS in 2003, SARS-1 was a zoonotic leap. We have a nice example there. We know many other zoonoses. Zika virus, HIV was a zoonosis. It came from simian immunodeficiency virus, left to humans. The other big pandemic. We know that influenza viruses do this. This is very common. And bats are often an origin of zoonotic diseases also for other interesting reasons. So I still think that's the most likely, but we cannot exclude the lab leak hypothesis. And there's some suspicious evidence there too. There's been some leaks from the CIA that suggest that some healthcare workers were sick in the Wuhan Institute of Virology around the time when we know that the virus might have been leaking. Whether that's true or not, who the hell knows what's leaking? By the way, I suspect our intelligence communities know a lot more than we do, but from what's publicly available, the principal thing is that the Chinese have not acted in a transparent way to dispel. Like, if it was not a lab leak, what do they have to hide? I mean, why wouldn't they share more information so we could dispense with that theory? So that is a little suspicious. On the other hand, it's been so politicized, and no doubt there is sensitive research being done in this institute, that they no more would like foreigners snooping through their elite research institutes than the Australians or Americans would. So maybe it's not overly suspicious. In other words, maybe their failure to comply simply reflects the politicization of this and ordinary sensitivities about defense technology, military technology. So I don't know. I do not find it implausible that it's a lab leak, but I also don't find it overwhelmingly likely. So I think we'll have to wait to see.
When I talked to my friend who works with SARS-CoV-2, who's a scientist at CSIRO, he felt as though geopolitics would never really allow it to be fully uncovered. But I'm interested because there's lots of moving parts in this. So let's try and talk about some of the moving parts. I know that when COVID first emerged, that the Batwoman of Wuhan, Shi Zhengli, ran the genome on all of the coronaviruses in her lab and was relieved to find that none of them matched. But since then, I mean, we've had this issue that they haven't been able to detect SARS-CoV-2 in any bats in the area or any intermediary species. And then the other part was, and I noted in your book that you cited a paper by Anderson, which was about the proximal origins of SARS-CoV-2, talking about, well, it's unlikely to be, recombinant and a construct, essentially, a genetically modified construct because of random mutations. But then later there was a rejoinder to that paper, which looked at all of these really unusual features to SARS-CoV-2. One of them being that it doesn't have any, usually the spike protein is a mutational hotspot. And SARS is very unusual. And so I wondered if all of that information coming together, as well as sort of information about, researchers from the Wuhan Institute becoming sick in the 19th of November mysteriously, I wonder if all of that information kind of starts to lean it another way.
No, I don't think so. Not yet. From what's publicly available, like I said, I still think more likely than not it was a zoonotic leap. But it's impossible to exclude the lab leak hypothesis. And, there are some leaks of intelligence information that's relevant. My own lab has used some data we have on mobility in China to trace back when we thought patient zero first would have occurred. And we put the earliest date of patient zero in early October. So who knows how that fits in with the other information that's publicly available. If these people were sick in the Wuhan lab in mid-November, then maybe they got it from somewhere else. I don't know. Now, it's exceedingly unlikely that people working in a virology lab were infected with a virus from some non-virology lab source. Yes, I mean, that's strange credulity. But the point I'm making is that we don't know. I don't think it's irresponsible to ask. I think we do need to ask. I'm willing to go where the data lead. If in the end it winds up being a lab leak, so be it. If it winds up being a zoonotic move, so be it. I mean, there is a truth out there, and hopefully we will find it.
Does it play in as part of the issue of silencing that we talked about earlier? Because, I mean, it was originally written off, and I know Brett Weinstein spent a lot of time on it, but originally written off as sort of just a conspiracy theory.
Well, I don't know who wrote it off as a conspiracy theory. I mean, I didn't. The idea that it was a engineered virus that was deliberately leaked struck me as extremely unlikely from the beginning for obvious reasons. I mean, the Chinese couldn't control it, and it would be a really stupid virus. If you were going to engineer a weapon, you would prefer that it kill young people, not the elderly. This virus, of course, has a mortality profile where it spares the young and kills the old. That's not a good bioweapon. So, there was a whole host of reasons that struck me as nuts. But the lab leak theory didn't strike me as nuts. It's not nuts. It's possible. It's just not likely.
The mechanism that I could think of, like I said, never been my area, viruses, but taking, a SARS virus, a coronavirus, and passaging it through human cell lines like HeLa or HEC or something like that might optimize a virus to us, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite likely that the Chinese were doing such gain-of-function research in Wuhan, as do we. I mean, every rich nation that has a bioweapons program is doing such research. Or forget bioweapons. People do that kind of work even for non-weapons type research. So I think likely they were doing such work. Yes, of course I do.